The world watched as the doors of the United Nations General Assembly opened. But what was about to happen was far more than just another political speech. It was history in the making, the kind of moment that future generations will look back on and say, "This is where the tide began to turn." Cameras flashed, leaders whispered, and then there he was, Donald J. Trump, walking to the podium with the kind of presence that pulls every pair of eyes in the room. You could feel it, love him or hate him, you couldn't ignore him. This wasn't just another leader standing at the UN. This was Trump, ready to deliver a message that would shake the very foundation of global politics. He didn't come to please the crowd. He came to deliver a warning. He came to remind the world that the United States was not backing down, not surrendering to globalist pressure, not bending to agendas that weaken nations and strip away identity. He came to say something that millions have been thinking, but few have the courage to declare out loud. Western civilization must be defended, or it will collapse. As his words echoed through the chamber, you could feel the tension building. The representatives shifted in their seats. Some nodded, others frowned, but everyone listened. This wasn't polite diplomacy. This was a call to arms, not of weapons, but of ideas, values, and survival. Trump knew the cameras weren't just capturing the faces in that room. They were broadcasting to every corner of the globe, to families in small towns across America, to struggling workers in Europe, to citizens watching their culture change faster than they can keep up, to students wondering if their future will belong to them, or to some faceless system designed far away by people they'll never meet. This was a speech meant for them. For you. For anyone who has ever felt like the world they grew up in is slipping away. He leaned forward, his voice steady but fierce, and declared that globalism has failed. Look around, he said, the evidence is everywhere. Rising instability, endless wars, borders erased, communities shattered, traditions mocked. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't hide behind careful words. He said what many leaders are too afraid to admit, that without strong nations there can be no strong world. And without Western civilization, with its hard-earned freedoms, its rule of law, its faith in God and family, there would be nothing left worth defending. And as he spoke, it wasn't just about America. It was about every parent watching their children face a future where they might lose more than they gain. It was about every citizen who has ever wondered why decisions that change their lives are made by people sitting in glass towers across the ocean. It was about reclaiming power, about giving voice to the voiceless, about saying enough. Enough of the lies, enough of the corruption, enough of a system designed to make the rich richer while ordinary people struggle to hold on to the values that give life meaning. This was Trump at his fiercest, but also Trump at his most human. He wasn't only speaking as a president. He was speaking as a father, a grandfather, a man who has seen what happens when a country forgets who it is. He spoke with the urgency of someone who knows time is running out. Because deep down, everyone in that hall knew he was right about one thing. If you take away the roots of a tree, it cannot stand. If you strip away the traditions and values that built Western nations, the whole world will fall into chaos. The camera zoomed in on his face, capturing the determination in his eyes. Every word landed like a hammer strike, building momentum. This wasn't a speech to be politely applauded. This was a battle cry. And yet, even in the fire of his delivery, there was something more, a challenge to the people listening at home. A question unspoken but clear. Will you stand up? Will you fight for what matters? Or will you sit quietly as the things you love are erased one by one? The silence in the chamber was heavy, but Trump wasn't there to make friends. He was there to tell the truth, and the truth often makes people uncomfortable. His voice carried across the massive hall, amplified not just by the microphone, but by the weight of conviction. He reminded the world that America's strength has never come from joining faceless alliances or surrendering its sovereignty. It has always come from its people, from the farmers in the heartland, from the workers in the factories, from the families gathered around dinner tables, praying for a better tomorrow. And then he turned his focus outward. He looked directly at the leaders seated before him, many of whom represent nations built on the same foundations of freedom and faith, yet who now seem eager to trade those away for short-term gain. He didn't name names, but he didn't have to. Everyone knew who he was talking about. Nations that have abandoned their borders. Leaders who put global institutions above their own citizens. Governments that silence their people in the name of progress. While crime rises, culture fades, and trust collapses. The camera cut across faces, some stone cold, others visibly uneasy. They didn't like being confronted, but they couldn't escape the words hanging in the air. Trump said what many fear to admit, that a world where global elites dictate the future is a world where ordinary people lose theirs. He drew a sharp line. Globalism, he said, promised peace, prosperity, and unity. But what did it deliver? Endless wars that drained nations of their youth and their treasure. Economies hollowed out as factories shut down and jobs vanished overseas. Streets in once safe cities now filled with crime, drugs, and despair. Families torn apart by the weight of debt and hopelessness. Globalism promised a new world, but what it gave was a broken one, and then came the pivot. The moment where he lifted the speech from critique to vision. He declared that the United States would not participate in the slow suicide of Western culture. That America would stand as a shield, a reminder, and a warning. The words hit like thunder. We will defend Western civilization, because if we lose it, we lose everything. For millions watching at home, those words weren't just political rhetoric. They felt personal. They felt like a hand reaching through the screen, reminding them that they weren't crazy, they weren't alone, that someone finally had the courage to say what they've been screaming into the void for years. For too long, people have been told to sit down, stay quiet, and accept that the world they love is disappearing. But here was a man standing at the center of global power, refusing to bow, refusing to apologize. He spoke about faith not as an abstract concept, but as the living heartbeat of free nations. He spoke about family not as a political slogan, but as the foundation of every strong society. He spoke about borders not as walls of hate, but as walls of safety, identity, and survival. He reminded the world that without boundaries, there is no nation. Without tradition, there is no culture. Without faith, there is no future. And as he laid this out, you could almost feel the energy shift in the room. Some leaders tried to look away, but the truth was too sharp to ignore. Others leaned in, listening closely, perhaps wondering if their own people back home were hearing this and nodding in agreement. Trump wasn't just speaking to the leaders in front of him. He was speaking over their heads, directly to the people those leaders often forget. This was more than politics. This was survival. And Trump framed it in a way that cut to the human soul. He spoke of parents worried about what kind of world their children would inherit. He spoke of communities struggling to keep their values alive against forces that tell them they don't matter. He spoke of ordinary men and women who want nothing more than to work hard, raise their families, and live in peace, but who are constantly told they are the problem. Every line hit harder than the last. This wasn't a polished, careful speech designed to win applause. It was raw, defiant, and unapologetically real. And that's why it resonated. Because deep down, people are hungry for truth even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's dangerous. Especially when it's dangerous. The chamber was still, but the world outside was restless. Millions of families sat in their living rooms, some on couches worn from years of use. Others gathered around small screens in kitchens after a long day's work. And as Trump's voice carried from New York across the globe, it wasn't just political commentary they were hearing. It was recognition. It was someone finally acknowledging the struggles they felt every single day but were too often told didn't matter. He painted a picture of a world slipping away, where traditions that held communities together are being mocked, where faith is being pushed into the shadows, where children grow up not knowing the stories, the heroes, the values that once defined their nations. He said plainly what so many fear, that if Western civilization falls, it won't collapse in a single explosion. It will crumble piece by piece as people forget who they are, as leaders chase applause from global institutions instead of loyalty from their own citizens, as ordinary families wake up one day and realize that the country they love no longer belongs to them. And then he leaned into something deeper: hope. Because Trump didn't just describe the decay, he described the fight to stop it. He spoke of parents who still teach their children to pray before bed. He spoke of teachers who quietly slip truth into lessons even when the system tells them not to. He spoke of soldiers, young and old, who stand ready to defend not just land but ideals. He spoke of workers who refuse to give up, who still believe that dignity comes from labor, not from handouts. These, he said, are the lifeblood of Western nations. These are the people the elites ignore but who actually carry civilization on their backs. The camera panned across the assembly hall, capturing faces that betrayed everything from anger to admiration. Some scribbled notes furiously, others stared blankly, but all of them knew one thing. This man was not playing the usual UN game. He wasn't speaking in carefully constructed phrases meant to offend no one and change nothing. He was speaking directly, in a language people understood, in a tone that made the heart race, and at home people felt it. An elderly man in Ohio leaned closer to his television, whispering, "That's exactly what I've been saying for years." A young mother in Texas wiped away tears, thinking of the world her children would inherit. A student in Poland sat up straighter, suddenly realizing that the struggles he sees in his community are part of something much bigger. Across the globe, living rooms turned into listening posts, and for the first time in a long time, people felt like someone at the very top was speaking to them, not at them. Not above them, but to them. Trump's voice dropped lower, almost as if he was speaking one-on-one with every single person watching. "If you want to protect your children," he said, "you must protect your nation. If you want to preserve your faith, you must be willing to defend your values. If you want to keep your freedom, you must be ready to stand." The words weren't abstract, they were commands, challenges, reminders. They struck the kind of nerve that forces people to reflect not just on politics, but on their own lives, and then he said something that pulled the entire room tighter. "The future does not belong to the globalists. The future belongs to the patriots." The words thundered out, crisp and final, like a line destined for history books. Some in the chamber frowned, some shook their heads, but millions watching at home stood up straighter. Because they knew this wasn't just about America. It was about everyone who still believes that home matters, that faith matters, that family matters. The emotional core of his speech wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was love, love of country, love of people, love of the values that make life worth living. And that's why it stung so deeply for those who have tried to bury those things under layers of bureaucracy and political correctness. Love, after all, is the one thing you cannot regulate, cannot silence, cannot erase. Trump didn't back down. He didn't soften his tone. He doubled down, making it clear that America would no longer play the role of silent partner in its own decline. Instead, it would stand up not just for itself, but for an entire civilization at risk of forgetting its soul. And in that moment, whether people agreed with him or not, they knew they were witnessing something different, something historic. This wasn't just a speech. This was a declaration.